Welcome to Sky Blue Symposia, a convivial gathering for stimulating conversation and a free interchange of ideas. Today, Tom Campbell is joining us for a new symposium as we continue consciously exploring. My name is Dave, and I will be your host. Susan, Sibel, and Chipper will be participating in the discussion. Tom and listeners, we're very happy you are joining us.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. This is always a fun group to talk to.
We're very happy to have you back. And let's just get right into it, if you don't mind. The first topic area we'd like to venture into is physical material reality, and Sibel will lead off the exchange as we begin consciously exploring.
Hi, Tom. This is Sibel. I've noticed that there are pieces of the simulation that seem to be rarely used, like the great biblical floods in history, but they're kind of still hanging out in our consciousness. And a modern thought about this might be worries about sea level rising. Why do you think that these pieces hang out like that?
Okay, well, that is an interesting question. The phrase "still hang out in our consciousness" indicates a narrative or idea that is fundamental to our nature, while rarely used kind of indicates that such concepts are metaphoric and systemic rather than, say, immediate. That is, they hang out mainly in the margins of our awareness and experience rather than in the center of our day-to-day concerns and experiences. There are, after all, disasters, both small and large, in our history. From Pompeii being buried in volcanic ash to the dinosaur extinction and the hundreds, if not thousands, of wars and famines and pestilence, both ancient and modern. And we seem to dwell on all of them long after they are as much myth as they are fact. Moreover, we as a race have a propensity to invent new reasons to fear whatever lies just ahead in our future. Like, remember the communist threat of the 1950s, or maybe the current threat of 2012. Mm-hmm. So you ask, what is the point? What is it that's fundamental to our nature here? And of course, the answer in one word is fear. That's what's fundamental to our nature here. We humans are driven by fear. Fear permeates all we do and think. Our egos, needs, wants, insecurities, and hopes are all derived from fear. Fear is so pervasive in our being, so common and everyday that we wallow in it. We dream about it and are entertained by it. And not just disaster or horror movies, but I'd say, at least 95% of our movies, plays, and songs are about struggle. They describe fights, both literal and figuratively. The focus is on the negative, things, events, people, or dire circumstances that must be overcome. And what about the news? Well, that's obviously mostly fear-based and mostly negative. In general, if it's not scary or negative, it's not news, it's not in history books. All the good things, the enlightened rulers, that we read so little about, they're given maybe a paragraph, and the ones that created destruction on a grand scale, pages and chapters. We search for things to fear, to watch out for, so we might protect ourselves. And it's easy to find plenty of things to fear. But if we run out, we simply make something up, invent problems. Peace makes us nervous, while problems give us something to work with. This is true in our personal lives as well as in our history. What does not frighten us is not very important. For example, benign, happy history and present-day good news. You never hear about this other than local from maybe friends or family. We tend to dwell on the negative and quickly forget or dismiss the positive because the positive can't hurt us. It's all about us and our struggle with it, or our struggle with them, or something yet unnamed, a struggle to materially survive and define material security. We are, at the core, frightened children. So why is this important to understand? Because fear is the opposite of love. We understand fear explicitly and implicitly, but love eludes us and confuses us. What does it mean to become love? People ask, is unconditional love possible for real people? Well, if it's not unconditional, it's not love. Our goal is to let go of fear and become love. Do you see about how far we are along in this process? That's why disasters as old as the biblical flood still hang out in both our personal and our collective consciousness. We are deeply fearful people and feel that such information is important to keep us safe. We frightened children need to remember and be aware of everything threatening that has ever happened or that could possibly happen yet, because within our little picture, we are neither safe nor secure. Death stalks us always. So I think that's why we connect emotionally at a fundamental level with these disasters, whether they're biblical or current day or imagined. It's just us and our fear kind of resonating with the negative.
So it's just a constant challenge of identify fear and say, do you want to go there?
I think we're attracted to fear. I mean, people will sit in front of their TVs and, watch the news and other things that are mainly about fear, about frightened people and terrible things that are happening to them. Nobody's going to sit in front of their TV and, watch good news. We're not drawn to that. So I think the fear-based things are very big and powerful in our awareness, whereas the good things they're not that important to us because they're not scary. They don't threaten us. So it's a matter of us being focused on our fears, and our fears, unfortunately, being a very large part of who we are.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd like to bring Susan into the conversation. Susan?
Hi, Tom. In our physical material reality, we have self-organizing systems such as nature and our solar system, and we're interconnected with these, and they seem to mirror back to us our inner realities, perhaps because of our relationship with them. In other physical material realities, are there similar systems, say with the central star and planets and nature? Is it totally different based on the lessons one can learn there? And what do you see as the unique opportunities for lowering entropy within this particular physical material reality?
Well, that's kind of a series of questions, so let me take them from the top. You ask about self-organizing systems. Yes, indeed, we are part of a self-organizing system. We too, as consciousness, are parts of a self-organizing system of consciousness. All such systems generally work the same way. Potential possibility and time eventually find lower entropy expressions that are stable enough to evolve to even lower entropy configurations, and after that it's just a matter of evolution takes in. So that's kind of how that works. In other PMRs, you say, are there similar systems in other PMRs? Yes, there are similar systems. Among other PMRs, that are most common underlying structure is that they are all virtual realities, and they are all in their own way trying to evolve, which is, again, that self-organizing principle continuing to chug on where there's room to chug. Digitally stimulated structures generated from scratch are not random, okay, like our consciousness. They're not random, but they are based upon rule sets, and they're stable enough. Structures are capable of long-term evolution, of great novelty. They're not easy to come by. That's why we don't get a great variety of these other PMRs, because there's just a certain number of rule sets and a certain number of parameters and input constants that'll create a system that's long-term stable. If it's not long-term stable, then it's not useful as a virtual reality. There are others, yes. And is it different there? Are the lessons the same? Well, the lessons are very similar in their fundamental nature. In other words, it's all about growing up, decreasing entropy, becoming love, and that's true across all of them because we're all consciousness. Therefore, we all have kind of the same goals. But each reality frame has its own unique outcome, since evolution begins as a statistical process. You see, it starts as a statistical process. So, if we went back 20 million years and kind of could reset back to that time and then let it start to evolve again, it's unlikely we'd end up with just what we have now. We'd end up with something different because a lot of those processes were random processes. Things happen and then you build from that. That's the way evolution works. We'd have to start with the whole universe, just back the universe up 20 million years, and then let's see what happened. It wouldn't be this. It would be something else. So you've got all these systems, they're all evolving, even if they have similar rule sets and similar stable systems, they produce all kinds of different things.
Well, I just wondered, is there anything unique about our particular one for lowering entropy?
Well, within this particular PMR, we are, believe it or not, more or less well balanced between good and evil, so as to allow kind of maximum challenge and maximum growth potential. If you didn't have enough challenge, then your growth would be slow. In other words, if it was too kind and benevolent, I guess, you'd have a slow growth because there wouldn't be that much challenging us. On the other hand, if it was so difficult to grow because everything was so awful, that would be slow too. So it requires a nice balance between the two, where you can, where you have enough protected area, I guess, where you can grow if you want to, but at the same time, you can't just kind of crawl into a cave and get away from it all and live the good life without stress. Stress is always right there all the time to help you grow up. So I'd say our PMR, when I say PMR, I'm particularly meaning our Earth system, which is just a little piece of our PMR. Our PMR, physical matter reality, is the whole universe.
Right.
And there's very probably other systems like Earth systems chugging along in our PMR, besides just us. Besides that, there's other PMRs. And I'd say at our Earth system at present is a medium to low risk, medium to high gain kind of physical reality, kind of virtual reality. It's not terribly stable right now because it's near what in math they call saddle points, or sometimes it's called tripping points, or a quickly changing phase, if you will, of its evolution. And that's true in a lot of areas. Our economically, we're kind of at one of these tripping points. Politically, health, scientific, spiritual, everything now is moved to global. What used to be local issues are now global issues. So everything is moving faster. We're sharing data. That brings all of these areas kind of to a head at more or less the same time. So, here we are in planet Earth, PMR, like this giant zit that's just about to pop. You see, it's sitting there getting tenser and tenser, and things are going to happen in all those areas that will be rather dramatic, in the next 5 to 50 years. Yeah, which in the big picture, that's a flash. That's now. So we have a lot going on right now. It's a very interesting time to be here.
It certainly is, and I think there's a lot of people that would say that they're experiencing that very intensely. I have a little bit more to ask about that. Are the rule sets of this PMR, the so-called constants of nature, are they subject to evolutionary change, or at least fluctuations, perhaps in accord with our own evolutionary changes or stages of entropy?
Yes, in general, I would say yes, they are. But then again, there are rules and then there are rules. And what I mean by that is some rules are pretty much fixed because they're fundamental to the structure or fabric of our virtual reality. Many of the rules in the rule set are like that. Those are not likely to change or change very much, although they may change in minor details, yes, as we evolve. However, other rules, like psi uncertainty principle, for example, are more like policy than they are like law. And they can evolve and change rather dramatically as we evolve. They're kind of there to protect us, and depending on how, boneheaded we are, those rules can ease up or tighten up.
Well, it certainly feels like everything is changing right now. That's why I wanted to ask you about that. There's been something on my mind that I've wanted to ask you, and that's about archetypes. How do you see these collective thought forms known as archetypes functioning in our reality? I've often wondered if they're like software for this PMR computer simulation, and if they're unique to this reality. In other words, do they speak to the lessons of lowering entropy available to us here?
Well, I'd say not exactly. They are simply the result of how we influence each other. Okay. They speak of our hopes, our needs, our fears, community, ambitions, and joy. All of those things, and they represent us at the most general level. If you boil us up from the specific to the general, at the most general level, that's kind of who we are. These collective consciousness thought forms, which exist at various levels of aggregation, and what I mean by that is you get kind of collective consciousness forms that are a family oriented, where people in families know what direction, where the wind's blowing, how to go, kind of what the overall, archetype for that family is, and also for businesses, for institutions, for countries, as well as for the planet, so we have those that go from tribal all the way up to international. I think Jung supported that idea too, that these archetypes are at various levels. They're not all at one level. So they're mostly created by us, so they are, in their specific form, unique to us. However, they exist for all collections of consciousness at all levels. So one might call collective consciousness herd consciousness. So they provide some collective inertia, drag and push both to the process of change. That is, they make us not so vulnerable to whims and fads. When big change is pushing us, as it is now, this collective consciousness is kind of a representative of who and what we are now, and it carries an inertia. So you actually have to move that. You have to change it. So we as a species don't just run off this way or run off that way with the latest idea, because we've got this big collective consciousness, these archetypes that we have to kind of dissolve and remake, if you will, and that's a slow process. So they represent a pressure to conform to the herd, as well as a hedge against poorly thought out lurches of the herd. Kind of an antidote to hastiness, I guess, as well as a generator of common interests, common attitudes, and common values, kind of a nudge toward cooperation of common purpose. So I think they're valuable to us in many ways, other than just that they represent us. They keep us stable in many ways. Just like my work, I'm trying to change a lot of ideas and the way people think in science, as well as in metaphysics and, I guess, theology and all sorts of things. But that change will come slowly. If it came quickly, then it really wouldn't be very deep. It wouldn't run, it wouldn't run strong or deep. It would just be faddish. And that's partly because of this collective consciousness inertia that has to be overcome. And I think that's a good thing. I know we kind of curse it and shake our heads at it when it's holding us back, but on the other hand, it holds back a lot of silliness as well. So it's I think in our best interest that we just have to have an uphill battle that lasts a long time, but eventually when it changes, then it's like a big tidal wave. When it changes, and it's not just easy to pull that momentum out of it. It's not easy to stop that change. So all of that's just the way it is. Common consciousness is basically a vector sum of all the consciousness that are in the group. If you have a mob, then that's a group consciousness, and everybody acts as bad as the worst person in the group. It's that sort of thing. You devolve to lower levels. If you have a group of people that are around someone very spiritual and very learned, they all seem to lighten up and get pulled up a little bit. It's that same thing. It's kind of the vector sum of all of it. And if we take vector sums across the whole planet, then those are the really big general archetypes. If we take them across our own culture, Western culture, then those are more, it's a smaller set of cultural archetypes. So that's, I think, they're just us, just our consciousness aggregated at a high level.
But it also sounds like nobody's going to be left behind, so to speak, as well.
Yes, we're all sharing in this.
Yeah.
You can sometimes feel it. If you're in a place where an idea starts catching on, a way of thinking starts to catch on, you can almost feel it. You can kind of see that it's catching on, and then you'll notice that people, just out of the blue, not because they heard it, not because somebody told them, but it just occurs to them. Same thought, the same idea. And it's like that all over. There'll be thousands of people where this attitude or this thought will just occur to them out of nothing. That's like the 100th monkey problem. You see,
Yeah.
it's the same sort of thing. It just does that because we're all tuned in to consciousness. We're all on a big net. And these ideas, as we're ready for them, begin to settle into our minds, and we start to take them as our own. But often, these things are not really our own so much as we're herd animals, and we tend to move with the herd. And this herd is not just a physical herd, but it works at the consciousness level as well.
Is this why then sometimes new ideas come and it doesn't come from just one person? It seems like there's several people in different parts of the world, kind of the idea comes at the same time and it just pops out into the collective consciousness?
Exactly. It's been brewing there in the collective consciousness for probably, the decade before. And it's just getting to the point that it's getting strong enough that suddenly it just starts to bubble out, in little physical pots. Yeah, that happens a lot. We'll go along for 100 years and nothing new will happen much in, I don't know, let's go back into the 1800s. Nothing new happens much in science. And then suddenly, bang, we have discoveries every other week because they just start happening. And we have people in Italy and the U.S. and a couple of other places, that come up with the idea of radio. The same with the arts and with cultural things, that these things do bubble up. But they've probably been in process for quite some time before the pressure gets to the point that it breaks surface. And when it does, it breaks surface in multiple places. I mean, look at now all the people who are suddenly interested in spiritual growth and seeing bigger pictures and understanding science and metaphysics is all one integrated thing. People are popping out of the woodwork all over who have this interest. And I think if we'd gone back 2 decades ago, we would have found a lot of people yawning, at the thought.
Now, you've spoken about in other realities where there's a physical rule set, but it's different. And in those realities, it functions more on a thought form basis or a mental plane, so to speak. Well, in this physical material reality, we now have social networks like internet, Skype, iPhones, everybody's got a phone, and they seem to be functioning on that level. Are we transitioning towards that sort of reality, or will this Earth reality continue to stay as it is so that we can learn lessons in this rule set?
I think both. The rules and the way we apply the rules here change. So both of those will happen. As we spend more time in virtual realities, that is reality based on information exchange, and like you say, there's lots of those now out there on our computer networks. But when we do this, we spend more time in these virtual realities that are of our own creation. We become more open to the concept of living in a virtual reality. And thus, material reality begins to loosen its grip on our imaginations, on our senses. Our idea of what's possible and what is likely start to change as we live in these newly created virtual realities of ours. However, once we learn that our physical reality is virtual, we must not let that fact make us any less serious in dealing with what appears, to be our day-to-day and minute-to-minute, physical interactions. Because these interactions that we have here is what we're here for. It's our optimal path, to the evolution of our consciousness. So we don't want to get so enamored of our virtual realities that we begin to live there and forget why we're here in this particular virtual reality. So yes, I think they're very good, and they're helping people, like I say, loosen their grip and open up their imaginations to the possibilities. But we have to be careful that it doesn't turn into a trap, and that is that we begin to live in these created worlds of ours and stop or at least decrease in some way our interaction in the flesh, eyeball to eyeball with real people, which is where the learning takes place.
Sounds like there's both a lot of benefits, but also it'd be easy to get sucked into it and forget why we're here. Yeah, that makes sense, Tom. I appreciate that.
We are pausing the discussion to enable our guest to provide more information about their work and activities. Sky Blue Symposia is speaking with Tom Campbell. Tom, would you tell us a little bit about the books that you have, what's going on, any symposiums that you're offering to those people that follow you?
Sure. Those people listening to this who want to know more, have an interest, there's several places you can go. One, of course, would be my website, which is www.mybigtoe.com. There you will be able to buy books, but if you really don't want to buy a book, you can go to Google Books and you can read it there for free. Otherwise, you could go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookstore, and if they don't have it, you can always order it. So it's available pretty much out there in all the usual ways. You go to my website, and there's a forum there. And on that forum, there's lots of discussion and lots of very smart people who have been talking about this and thinking about it for a long time, very knowledgeable. And that would be a good place to either just read. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of posts there on every subject imaginable. And that would be a good place to find out more of your specific questions. Otherwise, for general information, go to YouTube. And YouTube, you could type in my YouTube ID, which would be TWCJR44, or you can just type in Tom Campbell, or you could probably just type in My Big Toe, and you will be able to get it pretty quickly. Or you can go to Google and Google Tom Campbell or My Big Toe, and they will show you lots of places that you can go. But the YouTube station is nice, or I guess channel is what they call it, is very nice because I have all of the workshops and all of the interviews that I've done go up on YouTube. And they're there available for everyone for free. One of the best ones, if you want a good summary of the ideas here and get a good understanding of the theory as well as the practice of how to apply it, would be the Calgary workshop. And it came in a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Basically just a few hours on Friday intro, and then Saturday is the theory and Sunday is the application. So if you go there, you will get perhaps more than you really want, but still it's a good overall view of what I'm all about and what my theories are. You'll get more of the science there because I deal with the science more in my lectures than I do in my books because the books are really targeted to a very general audience. And the workshops are people who are already interested or they wouldn't be there. If you want more of the science, find it at YouTube. You can find it on YouTube, and you can find it at MBT Events. That's the third place to go. MBTEvents.com are the people that do my organization, my scheduling. They put the things up on YouTube for me, and they schedule where I go and when I go there. So that is a good site to find out what's happening in the near future. Well, that's about it. So I urge everyone to look into more detail because in an interview like this, it's very difficult to give you enough detail to answer even your most fundamental questions. It's kind of a quick pass over the top of a lot of very interesting ideas, but there's really not a lot of time for deriving the answers that I give. I just state them and that's that. You kind of have to take it at words value, and that's sometimes not good enough for a lot of people. They'd like to see, well, why did he say that? Where did that come from? Well, you'll find it on YouTube and in the books.
Thanks, Tom. After a short musical interlude, we will return to the symposium. We're going to shift the conversation over to reducing entropy. Susan?
Do you sense that at this time there are more what some would call struggles and others would see as opportunities being generated to challenge and break down our fears and belief system? I think it seems to me we're manifesting a lot of our fears right now. And if so, what does this say about our consciousness?
Okay, well, yes, we are manifesting a lot of fears. Like I said before, we are near a saddle point. Again, that's a math term. It means basically an unstable point where you could slide off this way or that way, a tipping point. We're in a very quickly changing phase of our evolution right now. I mean, evolution can sometimes go on for millennia and millennia and not change much. But right now, we've got a lot of change coming very fast. And I mean that not necessarily like it's going to happen tonight, but very fast in big picture terms. And it's happening very quickly. And like I said, these are economic, political, health, scientific, spiritual. We're kind of all in this big boat together now on this roller coaster, since everything now has been made global by the internet. So yes, I think that a lot is coming together. A lot is happening, and it's like this big snowball rolling down the hill. The more it goes, the more it collects, and the faster it rolls. And I think that's kind of the roller coaster that we're on right now. And yes, people are coming together. They are connecting. People are starting to pay attention to issues that never drew notice before. Yeah, a lot of struggle, and a lot of opportunities, and a lot of challenges. But wherever there is opportunity to grow, there's also risk to slide in the other direction. You don't get a choice that only goes one way. That's not really a choice. If you're going to have free will, then you have to be able to choose badly as well as choose well. So when we're in these areas of many tipping points where a lot of things are happening, then we also have great risk riding alongside of great opportunity.
All of this risk creates a lot of uncertainty, and doesn't that create even more fear, or as well as an opportunity to face the fear?
It does. Uncertainty creates a lot of fear. Much of our beliefs that we have are there. We create those beliefs because of a fear of uncertainty. We're not sure how this works, and we just can't stand not being sure, so we make something up and believe it, and then we're done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. So we are going through very volatile times. With this great risk and great opportunity comes a lot of volatility. We're going to have a lot of extremes, I guess, in almost all directions, all at once. But we're hoping that the middle, anyway, with this inertia we talked about with the archetypes, will move in some orderly way. See, if we didn't have all those archetypes, if we didn't have that big collective consciousness, we may kind of be whipsawed around here with these changes. But that's not so likely to happen because it'll move slowly. The herd has to get enough of a critical mass, right? Has to get together before it starts to move, and that takes some time. So I don't think it's going to get as wild and crazy as we might imagine, but it'll be wild and crazy. It'll be wild and crazy in the margins, all right. We're going to see a lot of that continuing. We've seen it in the last decade or so. We have a lot of that wild and crazy behavior out there, even over the last 2 or 3 decades. And I don't think that's going to slow down any. As we get closer and closer to this thing going pop, we're going to see a lot more of that. But I think there's still a good chance that we will slide on into a brave new world without terrible upheavals. I mean, typically you do get big upheavals when you have changes of major paradigms. When we went from the pre-industrial into the industrial age, we had lots of upheavals. We had lots of abuses. We had lots of turmoil going on then, violence and other things. And that was benign compared to, the paradigm shifts that we're ready to hop through here in the next, several decades. So yes, it's going to be a wild ride, but hopefully we'll get through it just fine.
I'm very confident about that for some, I don't know, trusting about it, I guess. Yeah. Yes, there'll be a lot of challenges, though.
Chipper would like to join the conversation at this point.
It seems that consciousness may be the lubricant that helps with that inertial grab. Mm-hmm. There seems like there's that, I don't know, I describe it as a field conglomeration of all of these individuals out there doing what they do during the day, getting together and increasing the state within which they do that, such that growth of consciousness acts as a lubricant, hopefully to ameliorate some of the ripples on the edges, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. That's what happens. That's why it has to build slowly, but it does. This is the time, and it's been building. The people have been out there talking. Lots and lots of people have popped out of the woodwork to help the rest of the herd kind of negotiate the turns that are coming in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. I don't know, maybe the next 100 years. It's hard to say. I mean, in a lifetime, it seems like it's a really long time. But if you look at big picture time, it's in an eye blink. It's going to be really soon. We're going to see some real interesting changes. I think they're going to be good ones, but they may be rough. There may be some bad times before we get to the good ones, but I think the good ones lie ahead in any case.
Absolutely, Tom. And I want to ask about science as well, because it feels to me like we're on the crest of an evolutionary wave in consciousness and our understanding it in the field of science. And I'm thinking not only of your work, but that of, say, Dean Roden, Bruce Lipton, Anthony Peake, Rupert Sheldrake, the Electric Universe Project, and others who are rigorously challenging this current scientific materialist worldview. What's your thoughts on this, Tom?
Yeah, I agree. Indeed, we are on the crest of this wave, and it's a pretty big wave, and it's building quickly. Again, as we say, we've got a lot of people pushing on that wave right now. The ones you mentioned, and I might mention that's Radin, Dean Radin with an A.
Sorry.
And, yeah, just in case he's listening, right? We want to make sure we get that right. But
yes,
anyway, that it is happening all over. It's a very important thing right now. I see the science as the key, the first key kingpin that has to fall down, if you will, if we're going to make this evolutionary wave in consciousness, do what it needs to do. The scientists have to kind of turn around and embrace a larger picture of reality, and they're being pushed to do that. Every couple of weeks now, somebody sends me an email and says, look at this, Tom, and it'll be some article out of some scientific journal where people are claiming that virtual reality is a better model. It solves more things, and that's just popping out all over. So finally, it's beginning to take, and the kind of the wall that science is built against not invented here and ideas that aren't what they're already thinking is beginning to crumble there. And you're right. It's it's the Radins and Liptons and Peaks and Sheldrakes and many others who are chipping away at that. But I think that's the first thing, because as you've heard me say before, I call the scientists, the priests. They're the head priests of our culture. They're the ones that tell us what truth is. When the scientists stand up and say, well, this is the way reality is, this makes sense and that's a bunch of, hooey, then people believe that. So it's the high priest's job to tell us what's truth, what to believe in. And they do that. And until the high priests get a bigger picture, we're kind of stuck in the little picture because the herd is committed to their high priests. Now, again, that just may change. It may end up that one day, the herd will change enough that the larger population is going to drag the scientists kicking and screaming, over the threshold anyway. But I kind of doubt that. I think that our culture where we are now, we need the scientists to get a bigger idea of what reality is like. And when they do that, they'll find so much of their science that right now is not understandable will suddenly become understandable and explainable. And it will be a big boon for science. It's not that we need science to become mystics. We need scientists to become better scientists. We need them to let go of their beliefs and their biases and see a bigger picture and do better science. That's the point, because when they do that better science, then things like paranormal and mysticism will suddenly become a part of science. They'll be clear as to what those things are and why they're like that. Or we could say just as easily that science will become a part of metaphysics, mysticism, but it'll all become one is the point. There won't be this big divide. We will understand what's going on and why it's going on in a bigger picture, and science won't be sitting in a corner looking at itself in a mirror all day rather than getting out and seeing what's going on in the physical world.
Well, one of the most important things for me within your work is that you've brought together both metaphysics and physics. Again, back to that word balance. I just think that that's the way forward. And maybe someday we won't need the outer authority figures and we'll trust ourselves. But, until we reach that time, I'm so glad that there's people like you and others, scientists, who are working to bring all this to us.
Yeah, well, thank you. When I first wrote my books, which is now almost a decade ago, I got to the end of the books and I said, well, I really should kind of do a literature search and see if there's anybody else in the world that agrees with me. And when I did that, I did pop up a couple of names. I popped up Dr. Fredkin, who is a well-known physicist who says our reality is virtual. And I popped up the fellow's name. He was he's a professor now at Cambridge, I think, philosophy and physics both. He wrote a paper about the reality being a simulation. Anyway, I did find a few like that, and then there were another half a dozen besides that were not so well known and that were kind of out on the fringe of science. But now that's changed by 2 orders of magnitude. There's 100 times more stuff out there, and more of it is getting inside the kind of the journal barrier. These things are being published in peer-reviewed, hard science journals rather than just kind of talk on the outside. It's become more serious science on the inside. That's a really good sign. So I think we're seeing changing there, starting to make good progress. After all, it's just better physics. It's better science. So even though we have a lot of inertia to move in this case, I think it will eventually move. And our history tells us that it will. We had people for hundreds of years denying, that the globe was round, that it was flat. Matter of fact, you could get burned at the stake for, disagreeing with that fact. And eventually, everybody agrees it's not flat, it's sort of round. And why? Because it's true. Eventually the truth wins out. That's one of my favorite phrases, is the truth is not fragile. It may take a couple of 100 years, but the truth generally will rise to the surface eventually.
That's one of the things that, in spite of all that's coming, that leaves me very hopeful. And listening to you, and I've listened to probably everything you've done, it seems that who we are and whatever choices we make, it comes back to our intent and love. Is it that simple and that complicated in lowering our entropy?
Yes, it is just that simple, that easy, and that difficult. To wrap it up in one short phrase, here's the dynamic of how our reality works and how our consciousness evolution works. We're in this virtual reality, and in this reality, stuff happens, and we get to deal with it. How we deal with it nudges us toward consciousness evolution or de-evolution. So it's just that simple. Stuff happens, we get to deal with it. And that stuff doesn't have to be big, major stuff. It can be all the little day things. It's the stuff that happens to you 100 times in any 24-hour period. It's the little things. How do you get to deal with it? And that's where we should focus our attention. In other words, things happen, we react. Do we react positively or negatively? Do we have anxiety? Do we have fear? Do we have anger? Are we upset? All those things are pointing at ego, fear, things we need to fix. That's where we need to focus our attention. Right now, most of us focus our attention on the other end. Instead of the we get to deal with it end, we focus on the stuff happens end, and we focus on it with an idea of how can we manipulate this reality to give us more of what we want and how we want it. How can we make the good stuff happen to us and not and manipulate away the bad stuff from happening to us. So our focus is on how do we arrange reality to be the way we like it. And that's the wrong place to put our focus. We should just kind of let reality happen, live in the moment. Of course you have to deal with things. You have, responsibilities that you don't just, blow off. But that upfront stuff that happens, we kind of let that come as it comes. We don't try to manipulate it so much. And we really focus on dealing with it with quality, with a high quality of consciousness. That is that's easy, and it's no more difficult than that. So it's pretty simple, But for most people, it's hard to do because they're addicted to this manipulation in the front end. They want people to think the way they want them to think and feel the way they want them to feel and do the things they want them to do. And they manipulate that happening, whether it's trying to get your children to be a certain way or trying to get your boss to give you a raise or trying to keep the neighbor's dog from, barking all night. Whatever it is, you're working on making your reality more the way you want it to be. And that's not bad. I mean, it's not that you have to ignore everything. It's just that shouldn't be where your emphasis is, where your focus is. Your focus ought to be on the other end. And if you do that and you really, are interested in growing up and you're really interested in finding those fears and getting rid of them, it'll happen. All you have to do is do it and have the drive and initiative to stick with it, and you will succeed. So in a sense, that's easy. It's not that hard, but then that's true of almost anything. You want to play a violin? Well, stick with it. Keep working at it, and eventually it'll work out, and you'll be good at it. This isn't any different. It takes some dedication, and you have to really want to do it. If it's just kind of a fad thing coming by because you read it in a book, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference to you.
Yeah, very true, very true. Tom, by living in the bigger reality, what are the benefits for lowering entropy, and what are the responsibilities that this brings?
Well, a bigger picture leads to better understanding and insight, which produces an enhanced ability to be of service. Okay, so at any level of development, one is still making choices and evolving or de-evolving because of the quality of those choices. A bigger picture produces a larger reality with a larger decision space. Always has the responsibility at whatever level to use that decision space wisely, make choices that lower personal entropy. So yes, as you grow up, your reality gets bigger. Your decision space gets bigger. Your picture gets bigger. The more you understand, the more responsibility you have to use that understanding responsibly, wisely. So it all goes together. So once you outgrow this virtual reality, this physical reality, doesn't necessarily mean that you leave it and you no longer come here. It means that you now live in a bigger reality. You live in that plus other realities all at the same time. You can get a much bigger reality than just this one. And this one is huge because it's not just your neighborhood and your job and your city, that sort of thing, but it's the whole planet. That's a pretty big reality to put your arms around. And until you can put your arms around that with love, then you're still here struggling.
Thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
This completes the first segment of the 4-part series, Tom Campbell at Sky Blue Symposia.